Hey, I'm John, and this is going to be a spoiler-free review of Mark Lawrence's Prince of Thorns. And if this book looks extra pristine to you, it's because I actually didn't read it. I forgot I had this book on Audible, so I listened to the version narrated by James Clamp. Interesting narration, by the way. This is one of the books I learned about through BookTube, and it seemed to be very contentious for some readers. There's definitely taboo subject matter in this book. And it has a lot of things going for it and a lot of things going against it. Some negatives. The first-person narration seems to be very hit or miss for the fantasy community. And some readers might take issue with this narrator, both in his internal thoughts and his actions. Jorg Ankrath has witnessed the murder of both his brother and his mother, and he watched his father sit by and do nothing. So he grabs a band of outcasts and he hits the road. And there's a little more to it than that, but I don't want to spoil anything. Jorg is an incredibly cruel character in both his thoughts and his actions. The reader's forced to ride passenger seat to this character's mind. I'm sure this has been said before, but he reminded me of Alex from A Clockwork Orange. Not so much in his speech mannerisms, but the way he treats his brothers, his gang, and just generally how he looks at the world. And he's a very logical character despite his cruelty. It also reminded me of a David Foster Wallace short story, Girl with Curious Hair, from the collection Girl with Curious Hair. In that story, you're thrust into the mind of this antisocial, cruel, sadistic character, but you get to see his reasoning and how he became this person. And much like Jorg, the character in that story is very intelligent yet tortured, and you see why they come to these conclusions. Now, there's more to Jorg than just cruelty, but that's the main way the reader interfaces with this character. Jorg continually does despicable, unforgivable things to both his victims and his friends. Some readers will hate this, some readers do hate this. I found it to ride the line between edgy and interesting. I wasn't sure if I was going to like the book at first, but by the end, the characters, the world, the story grew on me. I think the beginning pushes the cruelty a little too hard in establishing Jorg as a character, and that's definitely going to turn readers off. And that's a shame because this is a fun story with some interesting fantasy elements. It's also a story that's a little smaller in scope than a lot of these grand epic fantasies. I don't have a problem with that, and it's actually kind of refreshing to read some of these small, focused stories. I think 250 to 400 pages is a great length for a book in general. I know a lot of these fantasy stories push 1,000 pages. This book, it did what it wanted to do, it finished. Not every fantasy book needs to have pages upon pages of exposition and world building, and all these extra characters that become ineffectual to the plot. I'm not going to go into what the fantastical elements are in the story. There's ghosts and stuff in the beginning, but you don't really know what happens. It's not exactly a twist when you find out exactly what happened. There's breadcrumbs sprinkled throughout. It gets worked in, it's fine. It's not a wholly original premise. It's been done better in different places, but not horrible. And once we get to the main point, the book sets a really brisk pace. I felt the ending came on a bit quick, but it wasn't that much of an issue for me. The biggest thing this book has going for it is Lawrence's writing. While Jorg can be cruel and malicious, he also has a witty side, and that's very entertaining to read. He's a character. He has a charisma behind his viciousness, and that makes him a little more menacing. The big point of this book, if you can get over the fact that you're sat next to a cruel, sadistic character, there's some enjoyable bits to it. You might like it. And you might find some of that stuff interesting. I mean, it's escapism. It's not a philosophy book. I had some issues with the pacing, but again, not a big deal, and you don't linger on things, which is nice. Definitely not my favorite book. I'm not gonna jump right into the next book, but I am open to reading it, and I heard the next two books get a little bit better. Mark Lawrence is big on BookTube, so I definitely wanted to read at least one of his books. I know his Red Sister series is really popular. I might jump into that next rather than King of Thorns, the next book. But yeah, it seemed contentious, and that's usually interesting for me, books that people don't like for whatever reason, and I can see why people wouldn't like this book. It's very understandable to me that as a matter of taste, you just might not want that in your fantasy series. Prince of Thorns, contentious but interesting. I actually recommend giving it a try. There's some topics in this book you might not like, you might not want to see, but I still think it's worth a read. So Prince of Thorns, did you like it? Was it too much for you? I'd be interested to know in any things that either triggered or turned you off about this book, or things you liked and feel guilty about liking. I'm John, thank you so much for watching.